sister. Always. The moment I walked into the courtroom, my mother laughed under her breath and my dad shook his head. The judge went pale. His hand trembled, and he whispered, "Dear God, is that really him?" Everyone turned to stare. They had no idea who I was until 10 years ago my parents drove me to a desolate bus station, handed me $500, and told me never to come back. I was 18. They didn't do it because I was a criminal. They did it because my older brother, Julian, was a drunk who ran a red light and left a pregnant woman bleeding out on the asphalt. My parents were powerful people. They had money, influence, and a spotless reputation to protect. Julian was the golden boy, the charismatic heir to the family enterprise. I was just a quiet, expendable spare. So they made a choice. They framed me. They planted Julian's keys in my room, coerced a few witnesses on their payroll, and told the police I had fled the state in a panic. The official story was that the guilt drove me to vanish. For 10 years, I was a ghost. I changed my name. I worked grueling, bone-breaking jobs. I clawed my way through night school, then law school, fueled entirely by a freezing, suffocating rage. I didn't just survive. I thrived, and I watched them. I watched as they eventually filed to have me declared legally dead. They needed me dead because my grandfather, who always saw right through them, had bypassed my parents entirely and left his massive estate exclusively to me. If I was dead, the money reverted to them. Today was the final probate hearing, the day the court would officially wipe my existence from the earth and hand them the keys to the empire. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of courtroom 304. The hinges let out a low groan that echoed against the high ceilings. I wore a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than the car they drove me away in. My posture was straight. My face was a mask of absolute stone. I took a seat in the back row. My mother glanced over her shoulder. She didn't recognize the sharply dressed man sitting in the shadows. To her, I was just a spectator. She let out a quiet, arrogant laugh under her breath, whispering something to my father. My dad barely looked at me. He just shook his head, annoyed by the interruption, and turned his attention back to their high-priced lawyer. They were so confident, so untouched by the blood on their hands, but the man on the bench wasn't looking at them. Judge Arthur Vance was an old family friend. He was the one who had helped them bury the police investigation all those years ago. He was the one supposed to sign my death certificate today. He looked up from his paperwork. His eyes locked onto mine. I didn't blink. I just stared back, letting him see the scar on my chin, the one I got when my father threw a whiskey glass at me on my 16th birthday. Judge Vance went completely pale. The pen slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the hardwood desk. His hand began to tremble violently. He leaned back in his leather chair, the color draining from his face as if he were looking at an actual ghost. "Dear God," he whispered, his voice catching the microphone. "Is that really him?" The courtroom went dead silent. My mother stopped smiling. My father stiffened. The bailiff, the lawyers, the stenographer, everyone turned to stare at me. They had no idea who I was. Not until I stood up, walked past a wooden gate, and stepped directly up to the plaintiff's table. I looked down at my mother. The arrogance slowly melted from her face, replaced by a horrifying, suffocating realization. Her breath hitched. "Elias?" she gasped, her voice trembling. "You're supposed to be dead," my father blurted out, standing up so fast his chair tipped over. "I was," I said, my voice dangerously calm, but hell spat me back out. I didn't look at them anymore. I turned to Judge Vance, pulling a thick manila envelope from my briefcase. I placed it gently onto his bench. "I am Elias Thorne," I said, projecting my voice so every single person in the room could hear. "And I am formally contesting the declaration of my death." Judge Vance stared at the envelope, his hands shaking too much to open it. "What is this?" he croaked. "That," I said softly, leaning in, "is 70 pages of bank records, wire transfers, and sworn affidavits proving that you, Arthur, accepted a $2 million bribe from my parents to cover up my brother's hit and run." My mother screamed. Not a yell, a visceral, guttural scream of pure terror. My father lunged for me, but the bailiff was already on him, slamming him onto the table. I didn't flinch. I just adjusted my cuffs. "I'm also the anonymous buyer who purchased the debt of Thorne Enterprises last week," I added, looking back at my parents, who were now hyperventilating, "which means I don't just own my grandfather's trust. I own your house. I own your cars. I own you." I looked at my brother, who was sitting frozen at the end of the table, tears streaming down his face. "And Julian?" I smiled, cold and hollow. "The police are waiting in the lobby." I gave them the actual keys. I turned my back on them as the chaos erupted, pushing open the heavy oak doors and stepping out into the sunlight for the first time in 10 years.